Hi, I'm Ankhra, and I am the founder and president of PS314. We are a matchmaking agency for social change, and we brought to you a few different dialogues throughout the summer of 2020 just to discuss identity. What we found is that oftentimes we're talking to echo chambers, and we want to break out of our silos so we can have a better understanding of each other's lived experience and greater understanding of varied perspectives. And that's really the idea behind our Fireside Chat series. This is the third, and we're so excited to discuss race and privilege and progress from the perspective of two storytellers from New York and from South Africa. So I am so honored to bring in Marquise Smalls and Dylan Valley to join us today. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, good. I wanted to just kind of offer a little time for you both to introduce yourselves as you identify yourselves. So I speak to you or speak about you as storytellers, as filmmakers, but how do you identify yourselves, Marquise and then Dylan?
I identify as initially a teacher because that was my first chosen professional, but I'm also a son and a father and an unapologetic Black man here in America who has found a way to transition from teaching into filmmaking as a writer first, then a producer and award-winning director. Also like to think of myself as a loving human.
I'm a documentary filmmaker from South Africa. Like Marquise, I'm actually going more into educating and teaching. I'm seeing myself more and more as an educator in the world, and father as well, a dad, and all of that. So that's that's me in a nutshell.
Why did you both become storytellers, especially since you identify first as educators? But would do you consider yourself artist activists? Is that part of the goal? Who's your audience? What's the goal of some of the story? Is it more of a passion for you to tell a story from your perspective, or do you have an intended impact to change the minds or feelings of people?
As an educator, I was blessed to have the opportunity to work with children in the 8th grade level who I was helping create imaginative stories. And I always strive to tell my story too, because I just knew that in America, especially the Hollywood system, didn't do a great job, particularly in the 80s and 90s, of telling really nuanced, well-developed stories about Black people. So I would define myself as an activist artist in a sense that I wanted to challenge the system and what the system was portraying about us, going all the way back to Birth of a Nation and creating the stereotypes that we were now stuck with dealing with as people. And I wanted to counteract those narratives, and I wanted to tell the true story of who we were and who we are. Through a diasporal lens, I trace back to our African heritage and our lineage, as well as combining it with, our new current state of being as Americans.
I became a filmmaker because I always knew that I had something to say, and I just didn't have the platform. I think I felt as like a young person leaving school and going forward into the world that deep down I really wanted to, like Marquise says, tell stories that aren't getting told. I was just following my own curiosity as a young filmmaker in the world. I'm a person who grew up kind of like in a white neighborhood. Growing up, I was part of the first generation of kids who went to desegregated schools after apartheid ended, which isn't super unique anymore. But at the time, that kind of experience as a filmmaker, I think I really wanted to just get to the essence of who I was, what was my story, and like the story of my people. And only now I can look back and go, oh, okay, yeah, like I can frame it in terms of education, racial equity, Black business. At the time, I was just kind of following what I thought was interesting or would be cool to explore. So yeah.
I remember when I lived in South Africa, it was 1997. I lived in Durban. What I saw, because there was still somewhat of a mandate and a filter from the government after apartheid ended in terms of what was available, media and stories, they either had the PJs, which was a claymation show that was created by Eddie Murphy. And then they had the Cosby Show, right? Which I think like the Cosby Show and Different World, like all of those shows had such a huge impact on our generation. Marquise here in the States and going to school and that family dynamic. And then they had The Bold and the Beautiful, which was primarily white, and then CNN. So that was it. white people's lives were told through a soap opera lens, where everything was very romantic and wealthy. And for Black folks, it was either you were in poverty or you were considered to be upper middle class. And there was just no dimension for anyone. I want to talk about race, obviously. But just as storytellers, I mean, did you see yourselves on television as a young person? Did you see yourself on TV? And I want to start with Dylan.
When I was like a kid growing up, like maybe preteen, we used to watch in living color. It was on the South African Broadcasting Corporation, SABC. That show for me was it was one of the best things I could have seen as a kid because it was so funny, and it was kind of representing this kind of hip hop aesthetic and this kind of Black talent that we weren't used to seeing. Right? It was in South Africa. I know in the States you guys saw all kinds of stuff. Mm-hmm. But it was really inspiring from like a global Blackness perspective to see in living color. So I didn't really see colored men on TV much growing up, other than if you like watching the news or you're seeing a representation of a colored person that's like a gangster. But on the more positive side, seeing activists and people like that.
Role models have come up a lot. To be award-winning storytellers, both of you, speaks volumes for your tenacity and your talent. But did you see people, that you were saying to yourself, I want to be like this person, and this person is like me in some way? Dylan, I just want to kind of like go into that a little bit more in South Africa.
I don't think I could name anybody in film or TV that I thought was a role model. We have a very like strange industry in South Africa, and at the time, like kind of filmmaker that people knew about like across different cultures was a white guy called Leon Schuster. He used to perform in blackface. He would make a narrative film, like a comedy, like a normal comedy, and then he would include these kind of candid camera moments where in character he kind of dresses up as different people. So you'll be like an Indian person who'll go into like brown face. You'd be like a black person or a black woman. You would actually you'd go into full blackface. When I was growing up, that was South African cinema. We would watch that stuff. Then he used to get a lot of props for actually highlighting the racism of white people, because he would kind of show up in blackface and challenge white people and then get beaten up by white people. So really, he was doing something like at the time that people found really funny, but it was also really racist at the same time, where they were given a hug and a pat on the back and said, "Hey, I'm just joking. There's the camera," and they're like, "Oh, Leon, it's just you, ha ha ha," and that kind of thing. So that, I mean, as crazy as it sounds, that was South African cinema. You had like a bunch of films by Afrikaners, by white Afrikaners, that were also subsidized by the state as propaganda. In addition to that, there were subversive films by black filmmakers getting made all, during this time. It just wasn't widely seen. So for me, the kind of modeling I saw, the kind of role models I had, only came later once I was able to go to university and really study film.
So Marquise, I'm curious for you, do you feel that you saw yourself? I mean, whenever we're talking to Dylan or someone like Dylan from South Africa, especially of your generation, I'm always thinking I'm actually talking to our parents' generation, just because of the time and the progress, right? What did you see on television, in film, and maybe even in periodicals that depicted who you thought you were, who you thought you were not?
The who I thought I was not and who I knew I was not, first off, was all the news depictions and the classifications of us being super predators and constantly being, criminals. That was the first thing that I just knew, like the news did not get me and my friends right at all. Images and people that I looked up to growing up on TV, were shows like What's Happening, Sanford and Son, even Facts of Life, Different Strokes. Those kind of shows really helped me get outside of my world of growing up in the projects and seeing the way that other Black people lived, as well as like diverse people live together. Like Facts of Life was a really diverse show. Different Strokes also was basically made to show you how young Black kids could relate to an older white dude who was their now adopted father. Isaac on the Love Boat too was like really important.
You're kind of giving us Isaac a little with the fro, I have to tell you. Yes, okay.
So yeah, so like those people, and then as a filmmaker, I really have to be honest. Like George Lucas was truly my inspiration. Steven Spielberg with E.T. Those are the two movies that really inspired me to want to make movies. And then, like Dylan said, Spike Lee. Like as a college student coming up, and even as a high school student, I was able to actually be in Spike Lee's Doing the Butt video. Getting to see Spike Lee work in making that video, like also, and to see the behind the scenes process of what it was to create something visually, it was just amazing. And Spike was awesome. George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, Spike Lee really inspired me to explore storytelling through visual arts, because growing up we didn't have the same access to technology as we do now, and you really had to have resources, from buying film actually to getting the big film cameras to actually make stuff. And then as technology advanced, and I was in a position to be an early adopter of it, that's how I got into it, because I was already having the ideas and being inspired by these people and these shows, and just wanting to tell our stories in a more nuanced and three-dimensional way.
How has race impacted your life? Kimberly Crenshaw talks about intersectionality and how important it is that we're just so layered, right? I personally find that all of that lives within me. I'm very much a global oriented perspective type of person, with humanity kind of leading the forefront. So we're all very much connected. However, when issues come up like our racial uprising, my race and then my gender immediately comes at the forefront. Is that similar for you, Marquise, or is it different? I mean, do you feel like as a Black man in America, knowing that's only a couple of elements of your identity, does that lead you in your experience? And I'm also curious, and you talked a little bit about you knew who you weren't. Do you remember the Central Park Five and the impact of that language and narrative about Black men? So I want to talk a little bit about your experience with race in America.
I actually left New York because of the Central Park Five, because of everything that was going on with that. Because, I used to run the streets and not really do anything that was criminal, but we were just out because there was nothing else to do. So we would be out on the streets having fun in the city. And to see what those kids went through, my mom was working at NYU at the time, and I could have went to NYU for free, but I was just like, New York is attacking Black men, and I just got to get out of here. Like, I really needed to expand. We were seen as the enemy, and I just really could not continue to watch my friends and even, be fearful for my own life in that kind of situation. So I agree with you that our experiences are so diverse, but the main connection that I know that we all have is this notion of colonialism and slavery, and that we've all pretty much been molded through that lens. Growing up, like I had a very strong mother who was 17 when she had me, and she was really dark skinned. So growing up, she would always tell me, like, know your history, know who you are, know where you come from. Don't let them tell you who you should be. So I had that at home. That really helped me learn and educate myself around who we were as people, so that then I could easily say, like, oh, I know that that's propaganda. That's them trying to tell people who I am without even really knowing me or even allowing me to have a voice. So race plays a very important part in all of our lives, particularly right now, because it's finally in a moment of challenge. Like, people are really truly challenging the whole notion of racism, which again is created.
I want to go back to how identity impacts you when you're traveling. When I arrived in 97 to South Africa, which by the way was my first time to Africa. So as far as I was concerned, I'm going home. It was a big deal for African Americans, and the family that I was able to stay with, they were also from in Durban, and they Black, and they said to me when I came in, oh, we thought you were going to be Black, with such huge disappointment. So I'm devastated in that moment. I didn't identify what color I identified with, because I didn't know what that meant. So I didn't connect with that at all. I just connected with, I'm Black, but I guess you're just going to call me a different name, but I'm with you. I'm so curious to know, how do you feel when you come to America? Because you've studied here, you've worked here, you've had fellowships here. Do you connect with, because we don't have color here, so who do you connect with? Are you, I'm South African and I'm colored, or do you connect with the Black community and see yourself from that lens?
Yeah, it's a great question. Trevor Noah, when he came to America for the first time, when he kind of moved there, then W. Bell interviewed him on his show, which was a really great show called Totally Biased.
Mm-hmm.
Kamal Bell asked Trevor Noah, so why did you come to America? Because, everything is falling apart. We've got Donald Trump is becoming president and all this stuff. And Trevor was like, well, I just really wanted to be black. Even for him, he wasn't considered black in South Africa, or he'd have this question around his identity, which could be really frustrating, right? If you grow up with your black mother in a black neighborhood, and people see you and they won't accept you as black. So for me, coming to the States is great because I feel, or whenever I'm there, I always feel kind of free of that burden of coloredness. Sometimes I feel out of classification completely because people are not sure how to classify them. So that's great because color exists there. And I think the whole idea of colored people is it was one created by a colonial system. It doesn't have, for me, the name today, unlike blackness, doesn't have a strategic value in the world the way that blackness does, which blackness has a value of solidarity, of connecting people from vastly different parts of the world, and not only the United States, but different backgrounds, and connecting under one banner of blackness that you can all stand under, right? In that sense, for myself, it's great being in the States for that, and I do feel very much a part of a black community there, a broader black community, and it's always been, people have always been very welcoming to me and always treated me like a brother, which I always really appreciated, especially when people found out I was from South Africa. I think that it will always have an impact on my life. It'll always stay with me. That kind of sense of community that I found in America.
But it's interesting though that you say that you felt like you were welcomed in the community. I remember we would go back to the township often just to visit friends, and everyone was just so welcoming. And our countries, we're socialized to really just be about ourselves, quite honestly. And so individualism is something that you get a bachelor's degree in, regardless if you go to college or not in America. I find that's been my experience. You really have to work towards building community and an idea of collectivity. I learned that when I was in South Africa. I learned collectivity. I felt that very distinctly. And I also saw the impact of apartheid even after apartheid had ended. And having the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the trial. So I think from the outside looking in, you're thinking, well, now we're kind of moving into a utopia, hopefully, because now you've moved beyond it, and now you have Mandela. So I'm just curious what your perspective is of the impact of having someone like Mandela as president, the impact of, the post-apartheid movement, and specifically what it really means to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the country where people come and speak to the accountability of the atrocities of your past.
Starting with Mandela, an amazing leader, a symbol of hope, a fantastically charismatic person, someone who was also a black intellectual, and just all around great person. Seeing Mandela as a president, as a black president, I think it's like kind of indescribable. We all have this real, people from my generation all have this real connection to Mandela, almost as another father figure for us. And now now 25 years later, after the end of apartheid, we're starting to kind of unpack these ideas around what actually happened during the transition and what were some of the shortcomings. And Mandela himself, he wasn't a perfect person, he wasn't a perfect leader. And there were some concessions made, that have had detrimental effects for black people in terms of the townships and the material conditions of black people, the deep inequalities in South African society. There was a moment when Mandela came into power for the ANC to push these kind of socialist principles. The idea for a lot of the liberation movement was that we were going to move into a socialist democracy and kind of undo the racial capitalism of apartheid. And that didn't really happen. So there were lots of deals and concessions made. And today we have one of the most deeply unequal societies in the world. And those inequalities exist very much along racial lines. And so this is the kind of inequality we're living with today. And That's in part due to the leadership of the Mandela era, who A, maybe didn't see this coming, or B, were complacent.
There's been this narrative in America, post-racial America, once Obama was elected, almost as though, okay, we're done with this. So Marquise, what's your take on post-racial America? And is that really true?
Nah. If it was, we wouldn't be protesting right now. Again, racism is a direct component, and Dylan mentioned this too. Like, and it's interesting that South Africa deals with pretty much the same type of economic oppression that we deal with here, in that Black people are meant to be the foundation of the capitalist system in our labor and in the way that we make the economy run and work, but we are not ever compensated accurately for it. So that keeps us from having ownership and having leadership in crafting a society that truly allows us to participate. We are just taking what's given to us or created for us, rarely, if ever, put in a position to create for ourselves, which was another driving force in me becoming an artist, because I felt like that was the only way to truly be free in America, was to be an artist, because as an artist, you get to do what you artistically feel compelled to do. And, you just then have to have the resources, whether it be paint on a canvas or, make music or even just sing. You don't need anything else but your voice. That whole notion of just how systems are in place and then backed by the notion that you get to live a certain quality of life because you were born a certain color just is wrong. And it just is not backed by any true science or any true data that speaks to why that is, except for the fact that white people created it. We as Black people we weren't at the table to help create this society we currently live in. We're finally in a position today to be those advisors, or where we're finally at, and we're finally in a great moment of being able to hold these policymakers, being able to hold these wealthy people who've benefited from free labor for a long time accountable for, like, okay, yeah, maybe you got away with it and you were able to store and accumulate all this wealth over these years, as well as power. But now we have ways of holding you more accountable that the future is not going to look anything like it did in the past.
So I want to talk a little bit about progress and has there been progress made, and what can you point to very specifically, like what are the foundational elements that we're standing on now to move forward?
Yeah, so when I made my documentary Hating Obama, which was exploring the hatred that President Obama was receiving while he was in office, it was really unprecedented that, you would have people calling him a liar in his State of the Union addresses. You would have, Congress coming out, Mitch McConnell saying, like, we're not going to work with this guy. Obama, to me, was necessary for America to halt the dissension that we were in around losing the respect of the world and losing the trust of the world. Like, our history is on record. Like, we can't run away from it. But at the same time, our history is balanced out by our activism as people. Like, because I remember growing up too, when I was in high school and college, like, that whole fight for ending apartheid in South Africa and divesting, that was something that we were so passionate about, even though we had never been to South Africa. We didn't know any South Africans at all. But we just knew that there were other people who we felt were being oppressed in the same fashion that we were. And even though they were thousands of miles away, we cared. But as far as Obama's concerned, I think he did the best job possible as a leader of the free world, and is still to this day showing why he was the right person. And I do believe that we can get to a point of continued change in the racial society and system that we live in, but it's incremental and it's not going to be overnight. There's no way we could be post-racial at any point, anytime soon. But we need to continue to push and continue to make our own new table.
So when we talk a little bit about laws and policies, I was so moved to see the Truth and Reconciliation trials and the commission even be established in South Africa. And while Dylan, you talked a lot about there has been progress for sure, but everything could not be done by one administration, by one leader. I'm curious to know from your perspective, what impact the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and trials had on South Africa as a whole, white, colored, Indian, Black communities, and the nation where you are today, and then how you look at Black Americans and the racial issues here in America, if you think that maybe we need to have a commission or maybe something very different.
it's important for the country to actually to talk about what has happened, and also for people who did wrong to own up for what they did. I think that was really the strength of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Is it opened up a platform for us to talk about these traumas, like Marquise outlined, trauma of racism, the intergenerational trauma of it, and so it allowed South Africa space to kind of, emotionally and spiritually deal with that stuff. At the same time, reconciliation, it often placed burden on the victims of racial violence to forgive. It let a lot of the perpetrators off the hook once they had actually owned up to these things. But at the same time, it shouldn't have ended there. Like you said, one administration can't do everything, and one commission, one Truth and Reconciliation Commission, can't really heal the wounds of apartheid. I think in terms of America, I'm constantly like shocked as to kind of the ways in which racist right-wing views are becoming more and more mainstream. And I think that's also part of the fact that Americans don't even think of America as a colonial situation where you have like a colony that was built and became the United States of America. I think that that's really important, that gets put onto the table, that people understand, like people like Donald Trump understand that, and that hasn't really been spoken about enough. And I think those kind of dialogues are really important, and I think that they would go a long way in terms of starting healing. I think it's great, the outpouring of protests and discussions, and the way people are taking to the streets in America. It gives me a lot of hope.
And so I really want to talk about, what's your perspective, Marquise, about in America, this isn't simply just black and white, as we've talked about, or people of color versus white. There's also layers of intersectionality as it relates to socioeconomic class. And so what is your perspective of those who have been privileged to opt out?
To not see yourself, if you're not a part of the solution, you're still a part of the problem. Whether you sit it out and you just watch it, or whether you are thinking that you've gotten to a point where you're just above it. I just truly believe that if you've got to a certain socioeconomic status where you have a lot of money and you're able to now interact with only other people that have a lot of money, then for one, you've automatically put yourself in a minority, because the majority of people are not wealthy. So if you're choosing to now be a minority, but you maintain that notion in your mind that you're living a better, grander life because of that socioeconomic place that you've ascended to or inherited or however you've gotten there, then you again are not looking at the human condition in a way that truly shows that you're compassionate and that you're understanding that we're all in this together. Like, and I don't think that there's ever a way to opt out. People are living in ways that are subhuman.
So you have like a very small black elite. After the end of apartheid, the kind of like generations of wealth that had been accumulated by white South Africans were never redistributed. They occupy a few spaces in that same structure, but the structure still serves to subjugate the majority of black people. Where my family came out of a generation, my parents came out of a lineage of, especially my mother's side, of colored middle class people who were teachers, educators, and so also had a sense of a bit more privilege than a lot of other colored people did, and the majority of black South Africans did at the time. That's where we find ourselves in this kind of middle class, this precarious middle class position, which also sometimes feels like it's like in America, because of the way the capitalism works, the inequality is just bigger, so it's harder for people to really occupy like the middle class.
It sounds very much the space that we've kind of landed on is to kind of shift our perspective from one-dimensional lenses of just race or class, but to one that's really more focused on humanity and being connected to each other. And pretty much start to build a new system, but first we have to break down the one that we have.
Right.
But a new system that will connect us all and provide equity. I think that it's a really difficult concept to wrap our minds around because we don't necessarily know what happens like from day to day. But I think that you all are giving us a lot to think about, and I'm so thankful for the time that you've offered. Just from your very specific perspective, there's so much connection between you two. And as storytellers, I want to play a little game of word association with you. So I want you to give me a word that you feel best encapsulates our past, our present, and our future. And then I'd love for you to tell me a little bit about how you imagine your legacy.
So for past, and this is the historian in me, the one word is knowledge. Present, resilience. And for future, equality. My legacy, I would want people to just know me and remember me for being committed to helping to create a world that sees everyone equally and treats everyone equally and eradicates judgment, challenges the notion of everything that's been imposed upon us to make sure that it's vetted in the sense of does it still work today?
So for me, the past is trauma. The present is uncertain. And the future, togetherness. The legacy I leave behind is a body of work of films that I've made that I feel would have reflected stories that needed to get told and contributed to a more equitable society.
Well, I think that you both are doing an amazing job, even if you were to stop today, just given the fact that your perspective is one that's about people beyond just your immediate community. You're really thinking broadly about a change. And I thank you so much. And I'm humbled by the time you've offered and the perspectives. I think it's going to be so helpful for people to just hear real voices of real lived experience. So thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.
And I'm wishing you great protection through the rest of 2020 because I don't know what's going to happen.